Nobody noticed when he stepped off the curb that afternoon. No security detail, no flashing cameras, just a man in a plain cotton shirt, shoulders heavy with fatigue, hands scarred by countless battles. He moved down the sidewalk as if in a trance, passing the barbershop's open door, the soda machine's lazy hum, children perched on stoops like spectators at a street play. Then the roar of a motorcycle ripped through the hum of conversation, tires skidding to a halt inches from his feet. The biker in a cracked leather jacket stared him down, the crowd holding its breath. And what happened next, when Ali didn't flinch, didn't raise his fist, caught every skeptic off guard. There was no punch, no struggle. Instead, something unspoken passed between them, a shift so subtle the onlookers didn't even realize they'd been changed. This wasn't the end of a confrontation. It was the start of a story no one saw coming. He stepped off the curb without a glance at the hot pavement, as though the sidewalk were a stage he had long since mastered. Around him, the block yawned in midday sluggishness. The neon sign of the barbershop flickered its last purple glow before cutting out entirely. Soda machines hissed after each coin drop, and passerby children clustered at storefront windows, their laughter sharp against the haze of exhaust and dust. A stray hound nosed scraps at a trash can's edge, oblivious to the world's burdens. Muhammad Ali walked alone, shirt sleeves rolled, collar open, shoulders easing with each breath. But his eyes told another story. They were distant, as if watching a scene from 20 years earlier in Louisville, when the young Cassius Clay first felt the sting of disappointment. Today his thoughts weren't of punches or titles, but of something heavier, the unspoken promise to stay true, even when every eye expected a show. He rounded the corner toward 4th and Clay Street, where a biker gang hung out at the gas station across from the newsstand. Their rumble came before their silhouette. A black Triumph roared to life, wheels spinning on hot asphalt. The leader, broad-shouldered leather vest tight over his chest, reined in his machine inches from Ali's feet. His buddies leaned back against other bikes, arms folded, waiting. Ali paused. The world contracted to the rumble of that engine, then stretched again as the biker spat. Saliva arced through the humid air, landing squarely on Ali's shadow rather than his clothes. Deliberate, precise. There was no wind to carry it away, no sound except the hiss of the cooling motor. The biker smirked, thinking himself the bully in the center ring. Ali remained still, head tilted down, gloved fingers brushing the dust from his pant leg. In his mind, scenes replayed. Yesterday's sparring session, the coach's reminder that true strength sometimes spoke in silence, the echo of a child's voice chanting Ali's name in Zaire, the weight of expectation pressing against his ribs. But he did not raise his voice. He did not raise his fist. The biker barked a challenge. "You some kind of joke, man? Got them pretty hands but no fight up there?" He gestured at Ali's head. The others laughed, out of bravado and bravado alone. Ali looked up then, eyes glinting like steel edges, but he did not speak. The city's hum, traffic lights clicking, distant car horns, the hiss of steam from a cracked fire hydrant, seemed to quiet around him. In that suspended moment, observers held their breath. A woman at the bus stop clutched her purse, a florist on the corner paused mid-arrangement, and the stray hound turned its head as if to watch. Slowly, deliberately, Ali stepped aside and continued down the block, each footfall precise against the concrete. He walked past the biker's mocking shout, "Run from me, pretty boy," but offered no glance in return. The biker revved his engine once more, sputtered a challenge, then finally peeled away in a roar of rubber and disdain. Silence filled the space where Ali had stood. A bystander muttered, half in disbelief, "Hey, that was Ali." No awe, just factual surprise. A few eyebrows rose. A young man on the corner let out a low whistle. Nothing else. Nobody moved to follow. Nobody applauded. The city swallowed the encounter without digestion, as though it had been no more than a skipped heartbeat. Ali rounded the next bend and vanished from sight. The neon barber's sign buzzed back to life with a final flicker. Soda machines clicked shut, and children resumed their play. Yet in the hush he left behind, a single thought looped in those who had seen. A man with a legend's name, unmoved by provocation, taught an entire street how power could sound like quiet. And so the day wore on, and this was only the beginning. The morning sunlight filtered through the grime-streaked windows of Eddie's Auto Parts and Cafe, painting long, brittle bands of gold across the varnished counter. Inside, 4 men who'd laughed and howled the previous afternoon over their triumphs still nursed the sting of being outmaneuvered, though no punch had landed. The leader, Crusher McKinley, sat slouched on a stool by the counter's end, nursing a bitter black coffee, his leather vest creased and heavy across his shoulders. Around him, the clink of spoons against chipped mugs measured time's slow creep. "Hell of a show yesterday," said Rico, the youngest of the group, tossing a sugar packet at Crusher. It fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird. Rico bent to retrieve it, but paused when Crusher's gaze traveled to the window, where nothing had changed save a few dusty trucks idling at the curb. "Think he even heard me?" McKinley's voice was low, less boast than question. He tapped the counter with the toe of his scuffed boot. "Dunno," Malone shrugged, sipping his tea. "But you know what? No one else heard a word either. Everyone just stared." The cafe door jingled as the eldest of their number, Harris, stepped in, checking behind him. He gave no grin, though his lips twitched ever so slightly. "Guy at the corner newsstand printed it this morning," little blurb. "Local legend stuns town by saying nothing." He flicked a crumpled newspaper across the counter. The headline glared, "Eli silences rival without throwing a single punch." Malone leaned forward, reading the grainy print. "He didn't fight back, and now everyone thinks we look foolish." "Foolish?" Crusher's laugh came out as a rasp. "I nearly broke that fancy glove, and he just turned and walked away." He stuffed his hands in his pockets. "That's because you gave him a chance to kill you," Harris said softly, then added, "And he isn't out here for street justice. He's different." Silence grew, thick like the steam rising from overheated radiator pipes. Outside, a boy on a bicycle coasted past the window, echoing the hush within the walls. No one spoke until the bell above the door announced a 5th customer, an older man in faded overalls, arms folded, eyes bright. "Seen it all twice now," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "First in '64, when he dodged Liston's final blow, and now this." He paused to light a cigarette. "He's holding fast to something none of us can touch." Rico frowned. "What's that?" "What did he hold on to by staying quiet?" The man exhaled, embers glowing. "Self. He never lost himself, and that scares folks like us." Crusher pushed back from the counter, shoulders straightening. He ran his fingers through his cropped hair, then reached under the counter, producing a folded scrap of paper. On it, someone had scrawled, "He never swung back." He stood. He smoothed the paper against the wood. "Guess I'll need to think on that." Meanwhile, the scent of leather and liniment filled a downtown gym that buzzed dimly like a trapped hornet. Allie stood before a heavy bag, stance wide, gloves raised. Each strike, jab, cross, hook, landed with measured precision, not cruelty. Sweat beaded at his hairline, slid down his neck, and evaporated in the warm, stale air. His breaths came in steady rhythm. Inhale, count 2, exhale. A metronome of intent. Spectators hovered near the ring ropes, reporters with notebooks ready, a stray photographer whose flashbulbs still bore the echo of camera shutters. Posters of past champions peeled from the walls, yellowed and curling at the corners. A lone, flickering fluorescent lamp overhead sputtered warnings of impending burnout. In the corner, Angelo Dundee watched without uttering a word. His arms folded, gaze fixed on Allie's controlled movements. At times, Dundee called out corrections, "Pot your chin, rotate your hip," but his voice remained calm, guiding rather than commanding. Allie circled the bag, legs bent, muscles taut. Every so often he paused, pivoting on the ball of his foot, eyes searching the empty bleachers as though expecting to see the biker crew milling back into town. The streets beyond these walls felt farther now, suffused with a different gravity. He heard Malone's taunt echoing faintly in his mind. "What, you chicken now?" But Allie did not flinch. With each rotation of leather meeting vinyl, he absorbed more than the bag's weighted resistance. He was forging something within himself, steeled resolve, deeper than any title belt. A young trainee watched from the sidelines, awe dimming into understanding. When Ali's gloves dropped, the boy stepped forward. "Sir," he ventured, voice hesitant, "why didn't you hit him back?" Ali unclasped his gloves and laid them across the edge of the ring. He wiped his forehead with a towel and looked the boy in the eye. "Not every fight calls for a punch," he said. His tone was gentle but firm. "Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to stand and not strike." The boy nodded slowly, as though absorbing a lesson older than any history book. Dundee offered the two a nod of approval. Behind them, a mirror reflected the battered bag, the ring, and Ali's quiet silhouette, unmoved by yesterday's taunt, unshaken by today's question. Outside, the motorcycle gangs would talk, the townspeople would debate. But within these walls, something had shifted. A culture of reaction replaced by a stillness that carried more weight than any blow. Ali had done more than silence an insult. He'd turned its force into a lesson neither the biker nor 1,000 onlookers could soon forget. In that gym, long after the reporters left and the lights flickered off, an echo remained. The echo of choosing restraint over retaliation, of forging character in the absence of conflict. And in that echo lay the true measure of his power. The roar of engines outside had faded into the distance by the time Ali left the gym, but its echo remained in his mind like a lingering thunder. He walked a few blocks south of the worn, grease-scored sidewalks, past shuttered storefronts displaying faded signs in French and Lingala, past the skeletal frame of an unfinished apartment block where paint peeled in great curls under the equatorial sun. Here and there, late-night laborers draped in scarves lounged against rusted railcars, smoking cigarettes and offering polite nods. No one asked for autographs. No one shouted provocation. Inside a small courtyard framed by crumbling stucco walls, Ali paused under a lone street lamp whose orange glow flickered as if uncertain it should remain on. He breathed in the wet scent of the nearby river, heavy with silt and distant fires. An ache slithered along his ribs, a reminder of George Foreman's sledgehammer blows still echoing in his chest. Yet he did not slow his pace. He needed the loneliness of the walk, to hear his thoughts over the silence. When he reached the square where the incident had occurred 2 evenings before, Ali saw the motorcycle gang gathered again. Only now they were quieter, uncertain. Their bikes, once gleaming chrome torpedoes, looked tarnished under the dim streetlights. Crusher McKinley lounged atop his Triumph, fanning himself with a greasy handkerchief, eyeing Ali from a distance of 20 paces. His friends stood in scattered groups, conversation hushed and erratic. A hush fell over the corner as Ali approached. He did not shift into a fighting stance or clench his fists. He simply stopped, standing erect, shoulders squared. Street lamps cast his long shadow directly at McKinley's feet. For a moment, the only sounds were the distant bark of a dog and the scrape of metal against concrete as a lone bicycle wheel spun in the breeze. No taunts arose, no laughter. McKinley's grin faltered. He kicked at the street with his boot, sending up a swirl of dust. "You back for more, champ?" he called, voice tight around the smirk. His words landed flat in the dusty air. Ali said nothing. His eyes were calm, yet they held a steady warmth that unsettled the gang more than any raised fist could have. One of McKinley's men, a stocky biker with a black eye patched under a torn denim bandana, shuffled forward. "You gonna teach him a lesson now?" he challenged, nodding toward Ali. The words hung uselessly. Ali merely tilted his head as if to consider whether this strange new ritual was worth his time. Behind the gang, a small crowd had gathered. Market vendors closing stalls, a street musician packing away a battered accordion, 2 children on a concrete planter stepping closer, curiosity flickering in their eyes. They had heard the story. Ali didn't hit him. They had seen the newspaper. Now they watched to see whether silence would break or triumph again. McKinley frowned, glancing at his friends for support, but received only puzzled looks. The earlier thrill of provocation had drained away. He spat on the ground, a gesture meant to reclaim authority, but instead it drew a sharp intake of breath from the onlookers. Ali's gaze followed the path of the saliva as it landed. Then he simply turned his palms outward, as if presenting himself peaceably. Without a word, Ali lifted a single finger to his lips, the universal signal for quiet. Under that still, starless sky, the courtyard seemed to lean in closer. The accordion player paused. The children stepped back. Even the distant music of late-night radio from a nearby house faded into nothing. In that pregnant hush, something shifted. The bikers were no longer villains, and Ali was no longer champion. They were participants in an unwritten covenant. None could breathe until someone spoke. At last, McKinley's mouth snapped shut. His jaw clenched. He looked at the group, then back at Ali, and noticed the spray of dust around his own boots, the dust that had landed at Ali's feet the night before. A thought flickered through McKinley's mind. What if this man's power lay not in his punches, but in his refusal of them? An old woman, bent with age, shuffled forward from the shadows. She carried a battered tin cup, used to collect alms for her grandchildren. She laid it at Ali's feet and spoke in Lingala, voice rough but resolute. Your silence spoke louder than his spit. Without waiting for a response, she turned and disappeared into the side alley. Then, unexpectedly, McKinley moved, slowly stepping to Ali's side, heel to heel. He placed one hand languidly on the wide expanse of the champion's shoulder. The gesture was neither aggressive nor friendly. It was curious, almost apologetic. A ripple of surprise ran through the group. The bikers exchanged glances, unsure whether to cheer, laugh, or flee. No one moved. Ali felt the weight of the hand, but did not tense. Instead, he offered McKinley a tilt of his head, a silent gesture inviting understanding. In that gesture lay the story of every fight he had fought, every barrier he had broken, respect earned, not demanded. The hand slid away, returning to the biker's side. McKinley backed off a step, as though afraid to break a fragile bond. Then, with a deep breath, McKinley reached into his vest and produced a small, folded photograph. He held it out to Ali. Under the street lamp's wavering glow, Ali saw the image. Two young boys, sweaty and smiling, gloves up, standing before a wire fence. They were dressed in ragged t-shirts and patched shorts. One boy wore Ali's unmistakable grin. The other looked darker-skinned, his grin worn a little more shyly. Beneath the photo, the words were scrawled in pencil. My brother and me, we looked up to you both. Silence throbbed again. Ali accepted the photograph, unfolding it with gentle fingers, inspecting the faded faces. He met McKinley's eyes for the first time, and there was no trace of mockery, only an echo of shared memory. Then Ali placed a hand over his heart, closed his eyes, and exhaled. Under the lamplight, dust motes drifted like silent witnesses. The group dispersed quietly, each man absorbing lessons learned without a single strike thrown. The vendor reopened her stall. The accordion player lifted his instrument. The children clambered back onto the planter and whispered excitedly. The motorcycles rumbled to life, engines humming more gently than before, and one by one, the bikers rode off into the night. Ali remained in the courtyard a moment longer, the photograph held close to his chest. The quiet of his presence lingered like an afterimage. Then he turned and walked away, footsteps light, as though carrying a secret too vast for words. The square fell into darkness once more, but the people who had witnessed that exchange carried the weight of it long after. Proof that a single man's silence, spoken in the right place, could reshape the world without a punch ever landing. He stepped inside the squat brick building long before dawn, its single-pane windows dark, the quiet only disturbed by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the soft thud of leather gloves striking a hanging bag. The concrete floor smelled of sweat and old chalk, and the walls bore layers of peeling paint, posters of past champions cracking at the edges. In one corner, 3 youngsters in shorts and tank tops jabbed at mitts held by Ali's coach, their breathing uneven but determined. Ali moved among them, adjusting stances, offering brief nods of encouragement, his own gloves draped over one shoulder like a cloak of responsibility. The door creaked open, and for a moment, the world outside spilled in. Late morning traffic, the distant shouts of street vendors, a cigarette lighter's click. A tall figure paused in the threshold. A man in worn denim and scuffed boots, leather vest slung over one arm, helmet dangling by its chin strap. He surveyed the scene. The makeshift ring marked by frayed rope, a single fluorescent bulb flickering overhead, the intense focus in the children's eyes. Then he saw Ali, guiding a boy through footwork drills, and the man's own shoulders sagged, as though the decades of thrusting and swagger had finally come undone. Nobody announced him. The biker simply ventured further inside, and his boots tapped against the concrete in rhythm with the children's skipping rope. One boy noticed first, a 12-year-old with a gap where a tooth once was. He tipped his head toward the stranger and whispered, "Teacher, is that the guy from the corner?" Ali glanced up, paused mid-swing, then wiped his brow with the back of his glove. He studied the newcomer without surprise. No tightening of fists, no shift in stance. Just a soft curiosity in narrowed eyes. The coach lowered the mitts and stepped aside, leaving the room hushed except for the distant clang of a downstairs radiator. Ali approached, arms relaxed, and stopped a few feet away. "You here to watch?" he asked, voice low. "Or to learn?" He spoke evenly, with no edge of accusation. The children froze, gloves half raised, and even the coach remained silent. The biker shifted his weight. Years of barroom bravado had trained him to answer with insults or fists, but now, with all those young eyes upon him, he found no words. His throat worked, but nothing emerged. A bead of sweat rolled from his temple as he looked from Ali to the waiting youngsters, their faces open and expectant. Ali returned to the bag and resumed his rhythm, Land's loops that resonated like a heartbeat. His breathing, measured and calm, filled the space the biker had occupied. The man's chest rose and fell in time, as though drawn into the boxer's inner metronome. After a few moments, Ali's coach barked encouragement, sending the children back to their repetitions. The stranger remained rooted to the spot, absorbing every sound. When the lesson ended, Ali draped his gloves over the bag again and wiped his hands with a towel. The children filed out, laughing among themselves, grabbing water bottles from a dusty shelf. Only the coach and the biker remained. Ali stepped toward the open door, where sunlight pooled across the threshold. He looked back once, eyes steady. In the corridor, walls stained by years of humidity, the corridor light buzzed overhead. Ali closed the distance without haste. No entourage, no raised voice, just two men facing each other in the yellowed glow. The biker unfolded his arms, shifting from one boot to the other. Ali spoke softly. "I don't care what you meant back on that corner." His words held neither bitterness nor blame. "But right now, I'm handing you something bigger than a fist." He paused, letting the silence carry the weight of those unspoken possibilities. "It's on you what you'll do next." The man in denim swallowed, the leather vest hanging limply at his side. He tipped his helmet toward Ali, a gesture of acknowledgement. Then he turned without another word and exited into the fading morning, the quiet slam of the gym door echoing behind him. Outside, the biker retrieved his helmet from the rack, its paint chipped where the insignia had once shone. He swung a leg over his machine, engine silent until he turned the key. When it finally growled to life, he didn't speed off. Instead, he rolled up to the intersection in the same measured way, headlights piercing the soft haze of the street. At the red light, he glanced into his rear view, catching sight of the gym's darkened windows. His jaw moved once, as if chewing on Ali's words, then the light changed. He eased forward, the engine's rumble subdued, and disappeared into the hum of the city. In the stillness that remained, the empty gym seemed to exhale. The coach reappeared in the doorway, rubbing his hands together, but neither spoke. They both knew something rare had occurred. Aggression met with calm, provocation met with invitation, and a choice laid bare in a simple question. And in that calm after the visitor's departure, the space throbbed with the promise that true strength could reshape even the hardest hearts, without a single blow. The school auditorium smelled of varnished wood and stale popcorn. Rows of folding chairs creaked as they filled with teenagers in faded jeans and mothers in floral dresses, arms crossed or holding purses tight. A handful of veterans, men in patched jackets, women with silver-streaked hair, sat scattered among them, faces lined with years of hope and disappointment. Paper banners fluttered above the stage, reading Youth Leadership Workshop and Dream Big. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their hum barely audible beneath the murmur of the crowd. Muhammad Ali stood behind a simple wooden podium, its surface scarred by decades of pencils and coffee rings. He adjusted the microphone, though its cable was disconnected and it wouldn't pick up a whisper, and surveyed the room. No applause rose, no cameras flashed. He was not here to perform. A single spotlight cast long shadows behind him, narrowing the audience's focus to a man who had once been the world's greatest boxer, but now spoke for quieter victories. He began without preamble. "Strength," he said, voice low and even, "isn't the punch that knocks someone down. It's the choice not to use it against those who need it most." His words rolled through the hall like distant thunder, stirring a silence heavier than any roar. A trio of high school boys exchanged glances. Their crowded table of soda cups remained untouched. The principal, seated front row, straightened in his chair. His tie loosened, shoulders slack as though the statement struck him harder than any reprimand. In the back, the biker from the gym leaned forward on a folding chair, arms resting on his knees. His leather vest was gone, replaced by a plain button-up shirt. His hands, calloused from years of handling a throttle, were folded in his lap. He watched Ali not as a legend, but as a man who had offered him a challenge without raising a finger. Ali paced slowly, the hems of his tailored pants brushing against the stage's edge. "We talk about winning and losing," he continued, "but the real struggle happens when no one's cheering. When you step back into the real world, away from the applause, away from the cameras." He nodded toward a group of teenagers clustered near the exit, their faces pale in the glow of the exit sign. A young woman, no older than 17, stood and raised her hand. Her auburn hair caught the light. Ali stopped. He recognized her from the gym session earlier, a girl who had missed her first swing at the bag. She glanced around, then spoke. "My brother. He watched you fight on TV before he died," he said. "When Ali doesn't strike back, that's when he shows who he really is." A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. Ali's gaze softened, and for a moment, he closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of every child who looked up to him. "That's more than victory. It's truth," he said. He stepped away from the podium, descending into the crowd as though dissolving the barrier between speaker and listener. Teenagers parted like the Red Sea. Mothers checked their neighbors' reactions. Veterans perched on the edge of their seats. Ali reached the biker, who still sat in the back. He touched the man's forearm lightly, as though placing him on the spot, not for judgment, but for recognition. "Every choice you make, even in silence, speaks volumes." The biker nodded once, a single deliberate motion. Then Ali turned back to the stage, raising his hands, not in triumph, but in invitation. "Now," he said, "it's not about me. It's about you. Each one of you has power, in your words, in your actions, in your silence. Choose wisely." Silence stretched on for a heartbeat, then fractured. A tremor of applause rose in the front rows, cautious but genuine. A teen clapped once, then another, until the hall filled with the soft patter of hands against fabric and wood. The biker remained still longer, standing finally as if woken from a trance. He followed the wave of approval, stepping onto the stage's edge. Ali turned to him. Without stepping forward, the biker pressed his palm against Ali's shoulder and pulled a small, worn patch from his pocket, an emblem of the motorcycle club he had once led. He placed it on the podium's scarred surface, beside a creased photo of Muhammad Ali from years ago. No words accompanied the gesture. None were needed. Ali smiled, a quiet curve of the lips that spoke of respect earned without violence. He returned to the podium and tapped the forsaken microphone. "Let that be a reminder," he whispered, "that your legacy isn't built by knocking others down. It's built by lifting someone up when they need it most." The hall erupted in applause then, not the thunderous roar of a stadium, but the warm, sincere clapping of souls stirred. And in that moment, Ali's voice, unchanneled, undiluted, echoed through every heart present, a testament to the strength in silence and the power of an unspoken truth. The room was hushed by half-light and the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. A single fluorescent tube overhead sputtered, its wash of pale light casting elongated shadows across the scuffed wooden floor. Dirty sneakers and discarded jackets lay strewn about by the benches, where once children punched speed bags and bobbed for hooks. Now, it was quiet. The echoes of gloves against canvas had long since faded, replaced by the soft scrape of a door swinging open. He stepped inside without knocking. His gait was unhurried, almost tentative, as if he were treading through memories rather than a neighborhood gym. The scent of worn leather gloves, sun-baked, faintly musty, grew stronger with each slow stride. His eyes, weathered and reflective, sought out the familiar shapes: the ring's frayed ropes, the cracked mirror above the water cooler, the faded banner that bore the champion's name, Muhammad Ali Boxing Room. Though the man it honored had been gone for nearly a year. The gym's lone occupant, a teenager with smudged knuckles and a crease of concentration between his brows, paused his practice routine. He stared at the newcomer, uncertain whether to greeting or to freeze. The young man's corner stood empty, as though anticipating his own mentor's return. The boy left the mitt on the floor and approached with cautious steps, every echo beneath his sneakers punctuating the hush. The biker removed his jacket, folded it neatly, and set it atop a bench near the entrance. The piece of fabric was faded denim, once studded with patches, and the club emblem that had proclaimed him a leader. Now, the back panel was bare where the patch had been torn away, a scar of choice. He tucked the garment's collar under, straightening its form as though preparing to leave it behind forever. The teenager's gaze flicked between the jacket and the man, searching for cues. Finally, he broke the silence with a question that drifted through the still air like a tentative breath. "Sir, are you training today?" His voice was low, respectful, uncertain whether this stranger was friend or something else. The biker paused at the center of the ring, soles of his boots settling against the canvas. He looked up at the overhead light and exhaled, a gentle sweep of air that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Then he turned toward the boy. "I'm not here for me," he said quietly. "I'm here for him." He nodded toward the empty corner stool where once the greatest stood, as though the spirit of the hall itself awaited that final gesture. He slipped off his shoes, exposing feet calloused by years of metal pegs and foot pegs, reclaiming a different ground. Stepping gingerly between the ropes, he approached the ring's edge. With a deliberate motion, he reached for the denim jacket and draped it over the first rope. The motion was both farewell and offering, a simple act that felt heavier than any punch. Silence reclaimed the room, yet it hummed with meaning. The teenager swallowed and reached out, his fingertips brushing the frayed denim as though touching a relic. The biker rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, a gesture so unassuming that it could have gone unnoticed in any other place. Here, it was a moment of passing trust. He turned and walked toward the exit without another word. His footsteps sounded on the threshold, slow and unhurried. Behind him, the fluorescent light flickered once, then steadied, as though acknowledging that something unique had transpired. The boy watched until the door clicked shut, then stood motionless for a heartbeat longer. Outside, the street was dark and quiet. A distant rumble of a passing car, a dog barking across the block, mundane sounds that framed the night. The biker paused under the awning, his eyes tracing the row of lit windows on the opposite side. He drew a slow breath, the cool air filling his lungs with an unexpected clarity. In his pocket lay a small photograph. Ali, young and fierce, glove raised in victory. He held it against the light of a passing street lamp, examining the crease at its corner. The crease where Ali himself had once folded it, a private token tucked away before stepping into battle. He smiled faintly, a curve of lips that carried gratitude more profound than any roar. He walked on, leaving footprints in the dust at the entrance of the gym. The city's rhythms resumed around him, the distant click of neon signs, the muted hiss of traffic lights cycling, the low patter of late-night footsteps. He folded the photograph, slipping it into an inner pocket, and in its place lay peace. Not a grand redemption, nor a shouted apology, but a quiet acknowledgement that the strongest acts are sometimes the ones no audience witnesses. And behind him, in the empty hall where champions once danced and dodged, the denim jacket remained, a silent testament to how a man who refused to fight back had ultimately changed a life, and how even after he was gone, his presence endured in every glove, every rope, every echoed step.